The rain on the tarmac at Teterboro Airport didn't wash away the sting of the words. It only made the humiliation colder. Captain Preston Graves stood at the top of the air stairs of the Gulfstream G650ER, his uniform pristine, his smile cruel, and his arm extended like a rigid bar across the entrance. Below him stood Nia Coldwell, drenched and trembling not from the cold, but from a rage she had buried deep. He saw a nuisance, a trespasser, someone who didn't belong in his world of high-altitude luxury. He didn't know that the ink was already dry on the contract. He didn't know that the trespasser shivering in the rain wasn't just a passenger. She was the woman who had bought his entire airline 20 minutes ago. And when the truth finally hit, the turbulence would be lethal. The private aviation terminal at Teterboro was usually a sanctuary of hushed voices and polished marble, a place where the world's elite moved with the quiet confidence of people who never had to wait in line. But today the atmosphere inside the Sky Summit Aviation Lounge was thick with a different kind of tension. Outside, a late October storm was battering the New Jersey coast, turning the sky into a bruising shade of charcoal. Inside the lounge, Captain Preston Graves adjusted his tie in the reflection of a framed photograph of himself shaking hands with a senator. Preston was a man who wore his ego like a second skin. At 55, he was the chief pilot for Sky Summit, a boutique charter airline that catered exclusively to old money and new tech billionaires. He had the jawline of a soap opera star and the eyes of a shark cold flat and always looking for blood in the water. "Schedule says we're hauling a VIP to London tonight," Preston said, turning to his co-pilot, a younger man named David, who was currently scrolling through a weather report on an iPad. "Any idea who it is?" "The manifest just says N. Coldwell. Never heard of them. Probably some lottery winner blowing their cash on a one-way trip to oblivion." David looked up, nervous. He was new to Sky Summit and still intimidated by Preston's reputation. "I heard it's a corporate transfer, Captain. Someone from the West Coast. Management was tight-lipped about it." Preston scoffed, picking up his coffee. "Management is always tight-lipped. They think secrets make them important. I just fly the bird. As long as the check clears and they don't vomit on the upholstery, I don't care." He took a sip, grimacing. "Though if it's another rapper with an entourage of 20 hangers-on, I'm grounding the flight for mechanical issues. I'm not dealing with that smoke again." Preston walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Gulfstream G650ER sat on the tarmac, a sleek silver bullet under the hangar lights. It was his pride and joy, even if he didn't own it. He treated the plane like his personal kingdom, and he was the king who decided who was worthy of entering the castle. Captain the gate agent, a harried woman named Linda, approached him. The passenger's car just pulled up to the gate, a standard sedan, not a limo. Preston raised an eyebrow. "A sedan Uber or Lyft?" "Looks like a standard rental," Linda said, checking her clipboard. "Driver is unloading the bags now." Preston let out a short, derisive laugh. "A rental? Great. We're flying a budget tourist who splurged on a Groupon deal. Make sure you check their credit card twice, Linda. I don't want to be mid-Atlantic when the payment bounces." He watched through the rain-streaked glass as the car door opened. A woman stepped out. She was dressed simply, a beige trench coat over a dark pantsuit, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf to protect it from the wind. She carried a leather portfolio tucked under her arm and reached back into the car to grab a modest carry-on bag. There was no entourage, no bodyguards, no flash. Preston narrowed his eyes. She was a black woman, appearing to be in her mid-30s, moving with a hurried efficiency as she thanked the driver. "That's her. Preston asked, his voice dropping an octave heavy with skepticism. "That's Miss Coldwell," Linda confirmed. "She looks like she's here to fix the copier, not fly transatlantic." Preston muttered, straightening his jacket. "All right, let's get this over with. I want to be in London by morning so I can make my tea time." He grabbed his cap and marched toward the exit doors that led to the tarmac. He didn't like anomalies. He liked CEOs in bespoke suits and heiresses with Louis Vuitton luggage stacks. He liked passengers who looked the part because they validated his own sense of importance. A woman in a rental car with a single bag didn't fit the narrative of Captain Preston Graves, the pilot of the elite. As he stepped out into the biting wind, the roar of the engines from a nearby takeoff drowned out the sound of his own prejudice, but the thought remained loud in his head. She doesn't belong here. He reached the bottom of the air stairs, just as the woman approached. She was wrestling with her bag, the wheels catching on a seam in the concrete. She looked up, rain dripping from her bangs, and offered a polite, tired smile. "Good evening," she said, her voice fighting the wind. "I'm Nia. I believe we're ready to go." Preston didn't move. He stood on the bottom step, blocking the ascent. He didn't return the smile. He didn't offer to help with the bag. He just stared down at her, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose of absolute authority. "Ticket," he demanded, not waiting for a greeting. Nia blinked, surprised by the hostility. "Excuse me. I said ticket," Preston repeated louder this time. "This is a private hangar, miss. The commercial terminal for budget airlines is 3 miles south. I think your driver made a mistake." The wind whipped Nia's trench coat around her legs. "There is no mistake, Captain. I'm Nia Coldwell. The plane is chartered for me." Preston looked her up and down, making a show of inspecting her shoes, her bag, her hair. He let out a sigh, the kind a parent gives a lying child. "Look, I don't know how you got past the gate, but I'm not in the mood for games. This is a G650ER. It costs $15,000 an hour to operate. You don't just walk up and hop on." "I am aware of the operating costs," Nia said, her voice hardening slightly. "I am also aware that we have a slot time in 20 minutes. Now, if you could please step aside so I can board." "I'm not stepping anywhere," Preston interrupted, stepping down one level so he loomed directly over her. "Not until I see some identification that proves you can afford to breathe the air in that cabin. And frankly, looking at you, I have my doubts." Nia Coldwell stood frozen, the rain soaking through the shoulders of her coat. It wasn't the first time she had faced this specific brand of skepticism. In the boardroom in high-end jewelry stores, in the lobbies of hotels, she owned she had seen that look before. The look that said you are an error in the system. But usually it was subtle. A raised eyebrow, a hesitation. This was different. This was aggressive. "Captain," Nia said, keeping her voice incredibly level despite the adrenaline spiking in her blood. "My identification was cleared by your security team inside. My passport is in my bag. I am not going to stand in the rain and debate my bank account with the flight crew." "I am not just the flight crew," Preston snapped, leaning in closer. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of jet fuel. "I am the captain of this vessel. My word is law. And my law says I don't let suspicious characters on board, regardless of what the computer says inside. Systems get hacked. Credit cards get stolen." Inside the plane, Beatrice, the head flight attendant, peered out of the open door. She saw the confrontation unfolding and felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She knew Preston. She knew he had a type of passenger he preferred, and she knew he had a history of being difficult with anyone who challenged him. "Captain," Beatrice called out tentatively from the top of the stairs. "Is everything all right?" We have the champagne chilled." "Stay inside, Beatrice," Preston barked without looking back. "We have a security situation." Naya laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "A security situation? I'm a 5'4" woman with a laptop and a change of clothes. You are acting ridiculous." "I determine what is ridiculous," Preston shouted, his face reddening. "And I don't like your attitude. You think because you rented a car and printed a fake itinerary, you can demand entry. I know your type. You're trying to sneak a ride for social media clout. Get a picture in the leather seats, maybe steal a bottle of wine, and then claim you're somebody." Nia reached into her pocket. Preston flinched his hand, instinctively moving toward the radio on his belt, as if she were drawing a weapon. She slowly pulled out her phone. "I am calling Mr. Henderson," she said, calmly referring to the CEO of Sky Summit Aviation. "He will clear this up in 10 seconds. Preston laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Go ahead, call him. You think you have Arthur Henderson on speed dial. Lady Arthur is in shielding mode. He's selling the company. He doesn't have time for confused tourists." "I know he's selling the company," Nia said, unlocking her screen. "Why do you think I'm here?" Preston paused for a fraction of a second, but his arrogance bridged the gap instantly. "Oh, right. You're here to buy it. Is that it?" He gestured to her wet coat, her simple bag. "You don't make me laugh. The buyers are a conglomerate from Zurich. Serious money. Not whatever this is." He pointed a finger at her chest, stopping just inches from the fabric of her coat. "Now turn around, get back in your rental and leave before I call airport security to have you dragged off the tarmac. I will not have my flight deck compromised by a fraud." Nia stared at the finger. Then she looked up into Preston's eyes. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the lights of the terminal behind them. "You are making a mistake that will cost you everything," Nia said softly. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. "I'm giving you one last chance, Captain. Let me board. Do your job. Fly the plane. If you do that, we can discuss your behavioral issues in London. If you don't, if I don't what?" Preston sneered. "You'll leave a bad review on Yelp. Get off my stairs." He physically advanced, using his bulk to force her to step back onto the wet pavement. He grabbed the railing of the airstairs and swung the mechanism to begin retracting the steps, effectively sealing the plane. "Flight cancelled," he yelled over the mechanical whir. "Go home." Nia stood there, the water running down her face, watching as the door of the $30 million jet began to close. She didn't scream. She didn't pound on the hull. She simply wiped the rain from her eyes, took a deep breath, and looked at her phone. The screen displayed a text message from Arthur Henderson. Documents countersigned. "The wire transfer is complete. Congratulations, Miss Coldwell. Sky Summit is yours." She looked up at the cockpit window where she could see Preston settling into the pilot's seat, likely laughing with his co-pilot about the riff-raff he had just expelled. Nia dialed a number. "This is operations," a voice answered. "This is Nia Coldwell," she said, her voice cutting through the storm noise like a laser. "Patch me through to the tower and get the ground crew manager out here immediately. I want the tug connected to tail number November 650 Sierra." "Ma'am, we can't just—" "I said connect me," Nia ordered, "and cancel the flight plan for London. That plane isn't going anywhere." Up in the cockpit, Preston Graves was putting on his headset. "Sorry about the delay, David. Just had to take out the trash. Let's get clearance for taxi." He didn't know that the ground beneath him was about to shift. He didn't know that the trash he had left in the rain now held the keys to his engine, his career, and his future. The radio crackled to life. But it wasn't the tower giving him clearance. It was a voice he didn't recognize, the ground operations manager, sounding breathless and terrified. "Captain Graves, shut down your engines immediately. I repeat, shut down engines." Preston frowned. "Tower, this is Sky Summit 1. We are green for departure." "What is the problem?" "The problem, Captain," the manager's voice came back shaking, "is that the owner of the aircraft has just revoked your authorization to fly. You are ordered to power down and exit the vehicle." "The owner?" Preston looked at David, confused. "Henderson is in the Hamptons. He wouldn't call this in." "Not Henderson," the voice said. "The new owner. She's standing at the bottom of the stairs, and she says you refused to let her board." Preston's blood ran cold. He looked out the side window. Down below, standing alone in the rain, Nia Coldwell was holding her phone to her ear, looking straight up at him. She wasn't leaving. She was waiting. The cockpit of a Gulfstream G650ER is a marvel of modern avionics, a cocoon of glowing screens, synthetic vision systems, and the reassuring hum of millions of dollars of engineering. For Captain Preston Graves, it had always been a fortress. Inside these walls, he was untouchable. But as the ground operations manager's voice faded from the radio, the fortress began to feel like a cage. "Captain," David the co-pilot asked. His voice trembled, barely audible over the sound of the rain hammering against the reinforced windshield. "Did he just say, revoked?" Preston ripped the headset off one ear. His face flushed a mottled red. "It's a mistake, a glitch. Henderson is probably finalizing the deal right now, and some clerical error flagged the system. Or maybe that woman hacked the frequency. It happens." He reached for the throttle quadrant, his hand hovering over the start switches. "We are pushing back. Once we're in the air, they can't touch us. I'll sort this out over the Atlantic." David's hand shot out, covering the controls. It was a shocking breach of protocol. A co-pilot never touched the captain's hand during a start sequence unless catastrophe was imminent. "Don't touch me," Preston snarled. "Captain, look at the EIKS display," David said, pointing to the central screen. "And look at the ACARS message that just came through." Preston looked. The screen, usually filled with engine diagnostics and fuel flow data, had a flashing red banner across the top. It wasn't a system error. It was a direct command from the Sky Summit administrative uplink, a channel encrypted and accessible only by the highest level of ownership. Command immediate grounding. Aircraft N650S. Pilot authority suspended. Await boarding of owner. Preston stared at the letters. They were digital, impersonal, and absolute. "This is impossible," Preston whispered. She was in a rental car. She was wearing off-the-rack polyester. "She's the owner, Preston," David said, dropping the formality of captain. He began flipping switches, shutting down the auxiliary power unit, and killing the bleed air systems. The soft whine of the jet's life support began to die down, replaced by the hollow, dead silence of a powered-down machine. "And you just left her in the rain." "I was protecting the asset," Preston shouted the silence of the cockpit, amplifying his desperation. "How was I supposed to know she didn't look like an owner? Owners they're old white men in suits, or they're Saudi princes, or they're tech kids in hoodies. They aren't," he trailed off, realizing what he was about to say. "They aren't black women," David finished for him, his voice cold. He unbuckled his harness. "You're on your own with this one Graves. I'm going back there to open the door, and I'm going to pray she doesn't fire me by association." "Sit down," Preston ordered, but the authority was gone from his voice. It was a hollow command from a king who had lost his crown. David ignored him. He squeezed past the center console and opened the cockpit door, disappearing into the galley. Preston sat alone in the darkening cockpit. The screens flickered and went black as the main batteries were conserved. He looked out the side window again. The woman, Naya, hadn't moved. She was still standing there, soaking wet, watching the plane with the patience of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. He saw the air stairs begin to deploy again, the mechanical whine sounding like a drawbridge lowering for an invading army. Preston felt a surge of nausea. He thought about his pension. He thought about the mortgage on his condo in Florida. He thought about the reputation he had built over 30 years of flying. All of it was suddenly fragile, held together by the whim of the woman he had just humiliated. No, he thought his ego scrambling for a foothold. I can fix this. It's a misunderstanding. I'll explain the security protocols. I'll tell her I was being extra vigilant for her safety. She'll appreciate that. Owners love safety. He smoothed his hair, put his cap back on to hide the sweat beading on his forehead, and stood up. He would meet her at the door. He would be charming. He would use the smile that had gotten him out of trouble with the FAA inspectors in '98. He walked out of the cockpit and into the galley area. Beatrice was there, her face pale, holding a towel. The door was open. The wind and rain swirled into the luxury cabin, soaking the expensive carpet. And then Naya Coldwell stepped aboard. She was dripping wet. Her hair was plastered to her skull. Her trench coat was heavy with water, leaving a trail of dark drops on the beige wool runner. But she didn't look like a victim. She walked with a spine of steel. She didn't look at Beatrice. She didn't look at David. Her eyes locked directly onto Preston. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Welcome aboard, Miss Coldwell," Preston said, forcing his voice into a jovial baritone. He extended a hand. I see there was a massive miscommunication with the dispatch office. If I had known, Naya walked right past him. She didn't shake his hand. She didn't even acknowledge the gesture. It was as if he were a piece of furniture, and an ugly one at that. She walked into the main cabin past the galley and sat down in the principal seat, the starboard side captain's chair, upholstered in cream leather, usually reserved for the person paying the bills. She placed her wet bag on the polished walnut table. She took off her soaked scarf and laid it next to the bag. Then she pressed the call button. Ding! The sound echoed through the silent plane. Beatrice hurried in. "Yes, Miss Coldwell. Can I get you a towel? Some hot tea?" "A towel would be fine, thank you," Naya said, her voice calm and conversational. "And Beatrice, is it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Please close the cabin door. I don't want the rain to damage the interior. And then please ask the 2 pilots to join me here. We have a pre-flight meeting." Preston, standing in the galley, felt his stomach drop. He exchanged a look with David. David looked terrified. Preston just looked cornered. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and walked into the cabin to face the woman he had tried to leave behind. The interior of the G650ER was designed for comfort, but for Preston Graves it currently felt like a courtroom. The LED lighting was set to a soft amber, casting long shadows against the bulkhead. The rain drummed rhythmically on the fuselage, a constant reminder of the storm outside. Naya Coldwell sat in the large leather swivel chair. She had accepted the towel from Beatrice and was dabbing her face, but she hadn't removed her coat. She looked like a monolith of judgment. Preston and David stood in the aisle. There was no room for them to sit unless invited, and Naya had not invited them. They stood like schoolboys called to the principal's office, looming over her, but feeling incredibly small. "Ms. Coldwell." Preston started again, deciding that offense was the best defense. "I want to apologize for the delay, but you have to understand the position I was in. Teterboro security is good, but not perfect. When an unrecognized individual approaches the aircraft..." Naya held up a hand. She didn't speak immediately. She reached into her leather portfolio, pulled out a thick document, and set it on the table. The cover page bore the logo of Sullivan and Cromwell, LLP, one of the most prestigious law firms in the world. "Do you know what this is, Captain Graves?" Nia asked. "It looks like a contract," Preston muttered. "It is the acquisition agreement for Sky Summit Aviation," Nia said. "I signed the final pages 3 hours ago at a notary office in Manhattan. I bought this airline not because I love airplanes, but because the previous owner, Mr. Henderson, was liquidating assets to cover a margin call. It was a business transaction. Cold. Simple." She looked up at him, her dark eyes piercing. "But my arrival here tonight, that was a test of the company culture I just purchased." Preston shifted his weight. "Company culture, Ms. Coldwell. We are a charter service. We fly rich people to nice places, that's the culture." "No," Nia corrected him sharply. "Service is the culture. Respect is the culture. Competence is the culture. And 20 minutes ago I saw none of that." She turned her gaze to David. "What is your name?" "David, ma'am. David Miller. I'm the first officer." "David," Naya said, "when Captain Graves refused to let me board, did you check the manifest?" I didn't see the manifest, ma'am," David stammered. "The captain had the iPad. He told me it said N. Coldwell, but that he didn't recognize the name." "And did you suggest checking my ID before threatening to call security?" David looked at the floor. I assumed the captain knew what he was doing. He has 20 years of experience." "Experience in flying, perhaps," Naya said, "but clearly a deficit in judgment." She turned back to Preston. "You said I didn't look the part. You said I looked like I was here to fix the copier. You said I was a fraud, looking for social media clout. Do you recall these specific insults, Captain?" Preston's face was burning. "I was under stress. We had a tight slot time. I may have used poor phrasing, but my instinct was to protect the plane." "Protect the plane from whom?" Naya asked, leaning forward. "From a black woman in a trench coat." "Tell me, Captain, if I had been a white man in a suit with the exact same rental car and the exact same bag, would you have stopped me?" Preston opened his mouth to lie, to say yes, of course, but the words died in his throat. He knew the answer. Nia knew the answer. Even David knew the answer. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. "You profiled me," Nia stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "You saw my skin, you saw my gender, and you decided I was unworthy of your time. You decided I was a nuisance. And because of your arrogance, you tried to leave the owner of your company standing in the freezing rain." "I didn't know you were the owner." Preston snapped, his temper flaring again. "If I had known, that is exactly the point." Naya slammed her hand down on the table, the sound cracking like a whip. "You shouldn't have to know I own the plane, to treat me with basic human dignity. A passenger is a passenger. If I had been a secretary flying on a corporate transfer, would I have deserved to be humiliated? If I had been a nanny, would I have deserved to be mocked?" Preston recoiled. He wasn't used to being yelled at. He was the one who did the yelling. "You treat people based on what you think they can do for you." Naya continued, her voice lowering to a dangerous growl. You kiss the rings of the billionaires, and you kick the people you think are beneath you. That is a rot, Captain. And I don't tolerate rot in my investments. Preston felt the walls closing in. He needed a lifeline. Look, Ms. Coldwell, I'm the chief pilot. I manage the entire flight roster. I have type ratings on 6 different jets. You can't just, You need me. This flight has to go to London. We have meetings. Naya raised an eyebrow. I have meetings. You have a problem. You can't fly this plane without me. Preston bluffed. David isn't captain certified on the 650 ER yet. You need a pilot in command. If you fire me, you're grounded. And I know you need to be in London for the closing of the European branch deal tomorrow morning. He smirked slightly. It was a weak smirk, but it was there. He thought he had leverage. He thought he was indispensable. Nia looked at him, studying his face like a biologist studying a fascinating bug. Then a slow, cold smile spread across her lips. You think you are the only one who can fly this plane? She asked. I'm the only one here, Preston said confidently, unless you have a spare captain in your handbag. Naya turned to Beatrice. Beatrice, please bring me the satellite phone. Beatrice handed her the handset. Naya dialed a number from memory. Hello, dispatch, Naya said into the phone, her eyes never leaving Preston's. This is Coldwell. I am at Teterboro. I need a replacement crew for N650S. Immediate urgency. She listened for a moment. Then she spoke again. No, I don't need to wait for a reserve crew to drive in. Check the logs for Global Exec Aviation, who is parked in Hangar 4 right now. Preston frowned. Global Exec was a rival charter company. Why would she be calling them Captain Anderson? Naya repeated the name. Is he currently on downtime? Good. Put him on. Preston's eyes widened. Bill Anderson. You're calling Bill Anderson. Bill Anderson was a legend in the charter world, a former test pilot who had retired from commercial flying 2 years ago. He was also a man Preston had fired 5 years prior for insubordination, which really meant Anderson had corrected Preston's math in front of a client. Bill, Naya said into the phone. It's Nia. Yes, it's been a while. Look, I'm at TEB. I have a G650ER that needs a captain. The current captain is incapacitated due to, let's call it a severe case of ego failure. Can you walk over? You're next door. Perfect. The rate is double your usual. See you in 5 minutes. She hung up the phone and placed it gently on the table. You see Preston, Naya said, using his first name for the first time, stripping him of his title. I didn't just buy Sky Summit. I have holdings in Global Exec too. I know everyone in this industry, and I know exactly who the good pilots are and who the bullies are. Preston felt the blood drain from his face. You can't bring a global pilot onto a Sky Summit bird. The insurance. I own the insurance company too, Nia said simply. She stood up. The movement was fluid and commanding. Get your things, she said. Get off my plane. You will receive a formal termination letter by email before you reach your car. And Preston. He looked up, broken. Don't worry about the ride home, she said. I'm sure you can call an Uber. Just make sure you check the license plate. You wouldn't want to get into a car with a stranger, would you? Preston stood there for a moment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He looked at David, looking for an ally. But David was busy studying the overhead panel, refusing to make eye contact. He looked at Beatrice, but she was looking at Naya with undisguised admiration. He was alone. With a final huff of indignation that convinced no one, Preston turned, grabbed his flight bag from the cockpit, and marched down the aisle. He didn't look back. He stepped out of the warm, amber-lit cabin and back into the cold, driving rain of New Jersey. Nia watched him go. Then she turned to David, who looked like he was waiting for the executioner's axe. "David?" she said softly. "Yes, ma'am. I'm packing my things now," he said, reaching for his bag. "Stop," Nia said. "Sit down." David froze. "Did you agree with him?" she asked. "No, ma'am," David said honestly. "But I didn't stop him. I should have intervened sooner." "You are young," Nia said, assessing him. "And he was your superior. Power dynamics are difficult to navigate. You tried to shut down the engines when the order came through. You listened to the authority of the owner over the bully in the seat. That counts for something." She sat back down, smoothing her damp pants. "Captain Anderson will be here in a few minutes. You will fly as his first officer. Learn from him. He is a good man. He treats people with respect." David let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 10 minutes. "Thank you, Miss Coldwell." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Nia said, opening her laptop. "Just get us to London. And David Timor." "Yes." "Next time you see someone being mistreated, speak up, even if your voice shakes. Because next time, I might not be the owner. I might just be a passenger, and passengers need pilots who care." "I will, ma'am," David promised. Outside in the rain, Preston Graves dragged his bag across the wet tarmac. He saw a figure approaching from Hangar 4 under a large umbrella. It was Bill Anderson, looking relaxed and dry. "Rough night, Preston," Bill called out cheerfully as they passed each other. Preston didn't answer. He just kept walking into the dark, wet void of the parking lot, realizing that for the first time in 30 years, he had nowhere to go. While the Gulfstream G650ER climbed smoothly through 45,000 feet, leaving the storm systems of the East Coast far below, Captain Preston Graves was waging a war from the front seat of his Nissan Altima. He hadn't left the airport parking lot. The rain was still drumming relentlessly on the roof of his car, a rhythm that matched the throbbing vein in his temple. He had been fired before once in the 90s for a personality conflict, but he had never been discarded. Discarded implied he had no value. Discarded implied he was trash. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He wasn't going to take this lying down. He was Preston Graves. He knew where the bodies were buried at Sky Summit. He knew about the deferred maintenance on the landing gear of the Challenger 300 fleet. He knew about the time Henderson had bribed a customs official in Bogota. "She wants to play hardball," Preston muttered to the empty car, his breath fogging the windshield. "I invented the game." He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline. He scrolled past his wife's number. He couldn't tell her yet, not until he had a fix, and dialed Roger Banks. Roger was a senior union rep for the Commercial Pilots Guild, and ran a popular aviation blog called the Mach Meter. It was a gossip rag for pilots, but it had reach. "Preston," Roger answered on the second ring. "I thought you were wheels up for London." "You calling from the SAT phone?" "I'm on the ground, Roger." Preston spat. "I've been grounded. Unlawful termination. Breach of contract. You name it." "Whoa, slow down," Roger said. "What happened? Did you clip a wingtip?" "I did nothing." Preston lied, the fabrication tasting sweet and necessary on his tongue. The new owner showed up. Some woman named Coldwell. She was erratic, Roger. I'm talking manic. She showed up late, smelling like alcohol, screaming at the ground crew. I exercised my authority as pilot in command to deny boarding for safety reasons. You know the protocol. If the passenger is a risk, we don't fly. Standard procedure. Roger agreed, his voice turning serious. You made the safety call. Exactly, Preston said, leaning back into the headrest, constructing his alternate reality. And she lost it. Screamed that she bought the airline and that I was fired. She dragged some scab pilot out of retirement, Bill Anderson, if you can believe it, and they hijacked my bird. I'm sitting here in the rain while a drunk owner and a washed-up cowboy are flying my plane across the Atlantic. That's a major story, Preston, Roger said, the excitement audible in his voice. Pilot puts safety first, tyrannical owner retaliates. It's the kind of story that kills IPOs. It's the kind of story that grounds fleets. Write it, Preston commanded. Put it up tonight. I want the headline to read, Sky Summit Owner Endangers Crew, Fires Hero Pilot. I want her to land in London to a media firestorm. I want the FAA waiting on the tarmac to breathalyze everyone. Consider it done, Roger said. I'll blast it to the network. By the time they hit cruising altitude, she'll be toxic. Preston hung up. A dark, satisfied smile crept across his face. He watched the rain distort the lights of the terminal. She had money, yes, but he had the brotherhood. He had the narrative. High above the Atlantic, the cabin of November the 650 Sierra was a sanctuary of peace. The turbulence had ceased an hour ago, replaced by the gentle, hypnotic hum of the Rolls-Royce engines. Nia Coldwell sat at the conference table, her laptop open, reviewing the logistics for the London acquisition. She had changed out of her damp clothes into a fresh cashmere sweater and slacks she kept in her carry-on. She looked every inch the CEO she was, calm, focused, and formidable. David, the first officer, emerged from the cockpit. He looked hesitant. "Ms. Coldwell?" he asked softly. "Captain Anderson suggested I come back and stretch my legs. The autopilot is handling everything. Is there anything you need?" Nia looked up from the screen. "Sit down, David, please." David sat opposite her, still looking like he expected a trap door to open beneath him. "You're wondering why I bought the airline," Nia stated. It wasn't a question. "It's not my place to ask, ma'am." "It is your place," Nia corrected gently. "You work for me now. You should know the mission. Do you know what Ether Logistics does?" "I believe. Medical supplies," David ventured. "Organ transport and rapid response medical infrastructure," Nia said. "We move hearts, lungs, and kidneys. We move specialized surgical teams into disaster zones. Time is our only currency. If a heart sits on tarmac for 10 minutes, too long, a person dies." She turned the laptop around. The screen displayed a map of Europe and Africa, covered in a web of flight paths. Sky Summit was a failing luxury charter. It was bleeding money because Henderson used it as his personal toy. But Sky Summit has something I need, the grandfathered landing slots at Heathrow, Charles de Gaulle, and Frankfurt. Slots that are impossible to buy on the open market. I didn't buy this plane for champagne trips to the French Riviera, David. I bought it so that when a child in Berlin needs a liver from a donor in New York, I don't have to beg for a landing permit. David stared at the map. The realization washed over him. He had thought he was flying rich tourists. He realized now he was part of a machine designed to save lives. And that, Nia continued, her voice hardening slightly, is why I have zero tolerance for arrogance. Captain Graves saw me as a black woman in a rental car. He didn't see the urgency of my schedule. If I had been carrying a cooler with a human heart inside his profiling, would have cost a life. Do you understand now? It wasn't about my ego. It was about the standard of excellence required for this work. David nodded slowly. I understand. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. You're seeing it now, Nia said. That's what matters. Just then the satellite phone on the credenza buzzed. It was a text message for Nia. She picked it up. It was from her public relations chief in New York. Alert. Article trending on aviation. Daily and Twitter. Source, anonymous pilot. Claims you were intoxicated and belligerent. Claims Graves was fired for refusing to fly an unsafe passenger. FAA has been tagged. Reporters are calling. Nia read the message twice. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. Is everything okay? David asked, noticing the shift in the room's energy. It seems Captain Graves is busy, Nia said, sliding the phone across the table so David could see the headline. Billionaire owner fires veteran pilot for safety check. Claims of intoxication and abuse at Teterboro. David read the headline and gasped. That's a lie, you weren't drunk. You were perfectly calm. He's the one who was screaming. He's trying to control the narrative, Nia said, taking the phone back. He knows that in the court of public opinion, a veteran pilot sounds more credible than a new owner. He's banking on the stereotype that rich people are unhinged and pilots are stoic heroes. We have to deny it, David said, standing up. I'll make a statement. Captain Anderson will make a statement. No, Nia said firmly. We don't argue with liars in the press, David. It dignifies them. We let them dig their own graves. She began typing on her phone. What are you doing? David asked. I'm emailing the security office at Teterboro, Nia said. There are cameras on the hangar exterior. There are microphones near the gate access. And there is the cockpit voice recorder data from the moment we were on the ground. She hit send. Captain Graves forgot that modern aviation is a surveillance state, Nia said, closing her laptop. He wants a story. I'll give him a documentary. The descent into London Farnborough Airport was grey and blustery. Typical weather for England in autumn. Bill Anderson greased the landing, the wheels touching down so softly that Nia barely felt the transition from air to earth. It was the kind of landing that came from 40 years of experience and a lack of ego. As the Gulfstream taxied to the private terminal, Nia could see a cluster of vans parked near the fence. Paparazzi. The story Graves had planted had grown legs during the 6-hour flight. Looks like a welcoming committee, Captain Anderson said over the intercom, his voice dry. Don't worry, Miss Coldwell. I'll handle the walk-around. You head straight to the car. Thank you, Bill, Nia replied. But I think I'll address them. When the door opened, the cool English air rushed in. Nia stepped out onto the stairs. Cameras flashed from the fence line 100 yards away. A reporter with a zoom lens shouted a question about safety protocols. Nia didn't shout back. She simply walked down the stairs to the waiting Mercedes. A man in a sharp suit was waiting for her. Trent, her London-based attorney. Rough flight? Trent asked as he held the door open. The flight was excellent, Nia said. The departure was educational. You've seen the article, so hard to miss, Trent said, sliding in beside her as the car pulled away. Graves is going for a wrongful termination suit. He's claiming whistleblower status. He says you were drunk and abusive. Trent, Nia said, looking out the window at the passing English countryside. I want you to release the video footage from the Teterboro hangar to the press within the hour. The raw footage. No edits. Let the world see me standing calmly in the rain while he screams and retracts the stairs. Done, Trent said, tapping on his tablet. And the defamation suit. Draft it, Nia said. But don't file it yet. I want to see where he tries to land. 3 days later, back in New Jersey, Preston Graves was sitting in the office of the chief pilot for VistaJet, a major competitor. He was wearing his best suit. He had shaved, shined his shoes, and put on his most charming smile. The interview had been going well. He had spun the story expertly, the crazy owner, the safety concern, the tragic unfairness of it all. The chief pilot, a man named Henderson, no relation to the former Sky Summit owner, was nodding sympathetically. "It sounds like a nightmare, Preston," Henderson said. "We value safety above all else here. If an owner is a risk, you ground the bird. You did the right thing." "Thank you," Preston said, relaxing. "I just want to get back in the air. I have 20,000 hours. I'm an asset." "I agree," Henderson said. "Let me just run a final check with the PRIA database and your previous employer records. Formalities, you know." "Of course," Preston said. He wasn't worried. He had Roger's article. He had the narrative. Henderson typed on his computer. He frowned. He clicked a few more times. Then he stopped typing. The silence in the room grew heavy. Henderson turned the monitor around. "Preston," Henderson said, his voice chilly. "Have you seen YouTube today? YouTube Numb?" "Why?" Henderson clicked play on a video. It was the security footage from the Teterboro hangar. The audio was crystal clear. "I determine what is ridiculous. And I don't like your attitude. Get a picture in the leather seats. Maybe steal a bottle of wine." The video showed Preston looming over Nia. It showed her calm demeanor. It showed him physically forcing her back and retracting the stairs. It showed him abandoning her in the rain. But then the video cut to a split screen. On the right side was the cockpit voice recorder audio from the moments after Nia was left on the tarmac. "Just had to take out the trash. She doesn't belong here. Let's get clearance for taxi." Preston watched his face draining of color. It was undeniable. It was ugly. It wasn't the heroic stand of a safety-conscious pilot. It was the bullying of a prejudice-filled tyrant. "The video has 2 million views," Henderson said quietly. "The comment section is, well, you can imagine." Preston stammered. That's taken out of context." "The audio is doctored. It was released by the airport authority," Henderson said. "And Preston, there's a note here in your file from the FAA. They've opened an investigation into your conduct regarding discriminatory practices and failure to adhere to the common carriage regulations." Henderson stood up. He didn't offer his hand. "We can't hire you, Preston. You're a liability. If I put you in a cockpit, our insurance premiums would double. And frankly, I don't want a pilot who treats people like that." "You can't do this." Preston stood up, his voice rising. "I have rights. I'm a captain." "You were a captain," Henderson corrected. "Now you're a viral video star. Please leave the building." Preston walked out of the office, his legs feeling like lead. He walked through the terminal, and for the first time he noticed the eyes. Passengers were looking at their phones, then looking at him. He heard a whisper. "That's him. That's the guy from the video." "The racist pilot." "Yeah, the one who left the lady in the rain." He hurried to his car. His phone was buzzing incessantly. Notifications from Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. He looked at one. License review board hearing summons. He looked at another. Sullivan and Cromwell LLP notice of defamation lawsuit. Damages sought 10,000 Thusen. Preston sat in his car, the silence of the parking lot pressing in on him. He had tried to destroy Nia Coldwell with a lie. She had destroyed him with the truth. He looked up at the sky where a jet was just taking off, climbing into the clouds. He knew, with a sinking, terrible certainty, that he would never command a vessel in that sky again. He had barred the gate for Nia, but in doing so, he had locked himself out of the only world he had ever known. 6 months had passed since the rainstorm at Teterboro. For Preston Graves, the fallout had been absolute. The defamation lawsuit settled out of court, stripping him of his pension and his Florida condo. But the final blow came from the FAA, citing his falsified safety reports and character issues. They suspended his license. At 56, the self-proclaimed gatekeeper of the sky was permanently grounded. On a humid Tuesday afternoon, Preston wasn't checking flight instruments. He was adjusting the rear-view mirror of a battered Ford van. He wore a cheap blue polo stamped Easy Park and Fly. His new reality was driving a shuttle for the budget commercial terminal, ferrying the very travelers he had once sneered at. "Hey, driver, hurry up with the bags," a passenger shouted, banging on the window. "Coming," Preston muttered, hauling heavy suitcases into the trunk with aching knees. Stuck in traffic near the private hangars, he idled at a red light. Through the chain-link fence, he saw the Sky Summit tarmac. It was bustling with activity. And there it was, tail number November 650 Sierra, the G650ER gleaming in the sun. A black sedan pulled up to the jet. Nia Coldwell stepped out, looking impeccable in a navy suit. She wasn't boarding. She was seeing off the crew. The pilot turned to shake her hand. Preston squinted, his breath catching in his throat. It was David. The young co-pilot Preston had silenced now wore the 4 gold stripes of a captain. David stood tall, confident and respected, listening to Nia with a smile. Preston watched, paralyzed by the sight. The kid he had tried to bully into complicity was living the life Preston had thrown away. The traffic light turned green. Horns blared aggressively behind him. "Move it, buddy." Preston jerked the van forward, just as the Gulfstream's engines roared to life. The silver jet rocketed overhead, banking east, free and powerful. Preston gripped the sticky steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He remembered Nia's warning from that night in the rain. "You are making a mistake that will cost you everything." She hadn't fired him because of safety. She fired him because he forgot that a pilot is a servant, not a king. He had judged the owner of the airline by her rental car, and now he was driving a vehicle he didn't even own. He pulled into the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. The teenage attendant rolled his eyes. "You're late, Preston. That's a dock in pay." Traffic was bad. Preston whispered, his voice hollow. He killed the engine and sat in the silence of the shuttle. Above him, the jet contrails faded into the clouds. He had tried to bar Nia from the sky, but in the end, he had only locked himself out. Preston Graves opened the door, kept his eyes on the ground, and walked toward the time clock to punch in for a shift that would never take him anywhere. Preston Graves learned the hardest lesson of all: when you try to stand above others, due to pride and prejudice, the fall is a long way down. He judged Nia Coldwell by her appearance, assuming her worth was tied to her attire, but in doing so, he revealed his own bankruptcy of character. Nia proved that true power isn't about exclusion or arrogance. It's about competence, vision, and the strength to demand respect. Preston thought he held the keys to the kingdom, but he ended up locking himself out watching the very people he underestimated soar while he remained stuck in the traffic of his own making. It is a reminder that in life you should treat the janitor with the same respect as the CEO, because you never know who is signing the checks or who holds your future in their hands. Thank you for watching this story of instant karma and justice. If you enjoyed seeing arrogance get shut down and integrity take flight, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness costs nothing but pride, costs everything. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who later regretted it? Tell me your story in the comments below. I'll see you in the next video.